part in that interaction. The first was that um, uh, some people weren't skilled in the technology required in order to have video remote interpretations, and so for them that caused a little bit of apprehension. Um, Other people had a concern about it because about video remote interpretation because um, they felt that it was causing them to miss out on certain profits. One person explicitly said that, hey, now that I'm working remotely, I don't get a travel stipend. I don't get a paid lunch break. Um, my calls are more expedient now, and so I'm not making as much money, and I fear that I won't be able to meet my salary, prior to the pandemic, or make and earn the profits that I was making prior to the pandemic. Um, Another interesting find about the apprehension around our um, remote interpretation is that some people expressed that they were finding difficulty and that the clients um, had apprehension about it. And so while they were ready and willing to provide this service, some people, their patients, didn't trust the medium of using video interpretations, and so they might cancel their appointment, or themselves be ignorant to how to use the technology. And so that posed a problem as well. You have people relying on the interpreter to be the the IT person, um, um, and so trying to get the patient on board and queued up so that he or she could benefit from this technology, that also posed a problem and a professional concern for individuals. We did have other concerns that kind of also tied in with technology. There was also concern about creating quiet spaces with reliable internet connections. Um, some people, I have my kids at home now. How can I possibly, you know, conduct my interpretations, and I have my children in the background, and this is a huge concern for me. So with these new platforms for conducting business as an interpreter, there was also a lot of professional concern that came with those new mediums as well. um, just specifically, I'm just going to read some of the responses. My biggest concern is that most of these assignments are a lot shorter, so I'm wondering if there will be enough work to provide for a good salary. Rates continue to decrease. New and global competition in the field of RSI. Other interpreters selling their service for minimum amounts due to the lack of education affects us all. Preferential rotation again with other agencies, and not being able to get in as a result of it. Power outages. The possible switch to remote of all or most court proceedings being replaced completely by video interpretation. That things won't get back to normal soon enough and inexperienced interpreters will take over. Remote interpreting is not lucrative, and I worry about not practicing more of my skills with very basic interpreting assignments. So there were so many varied concerns that stemmed from switching over to these remote platforms. There also were concerns just about vocabulary, as a result of the pandemic, new terms, new functions. But that didn't seem to be as heavily on people's hearts as switching to the remote platforms, be it needing to use the technology itself, or also whether or not it was lucrative enough for the interpreters. And the last question that I asked in the impact section of the questionnaire was, what support do interpreters need in response to the pandemic or in general? I am going to read my response to that because I really enjoyed what I wrote and how I wrote it. So finding number 5, I devoted the last question to giving interpreters an opportunity to share what type of support they need due to changes or challenges as a result of the pandemic or due to the nature of the job itself. The responses vary, but have a common theme of security and or support. In terms of security, interpreters expressed wanting job security, security in their earnings, security through relief aid during the pandemic. As it related to support, interpreters shared they wanted support that respects their profession, support that protects their mental health, support that equips them for conducting better business, support from one another. A few interpreters simply could not articulate what they needed. And I have some direct responses, that I heard. I want to be treated like part of the medical staff. It's vital to insist that the rates for the remote match those of on-site. Explicitly, someone said, hey, I want to be paid the same remotely as on-site because I'm using the same mental skills. I'm using the same skills. Why is it reduced because I'm not in person? That's not fair. Sometimes it requires more of me in order to do it remotely, do my work remotely. I want a lot more help, trainings, workshops, unemployment benefits, flexibility to provide services, support for the work-related stress and or vicarious trauma related to COVID-19. A lot of interpreters also express that emotionally, the pandemic has been hard for them. The nature of the calls, they're inundated with calls that are heavy in content, COVID-19 content, and death, laced with death, and difficult calls. And then because the interpreter is often seen as this neutral figure in carrying out the assignment, I think also their mental health is kind of being overlooked because they often play this, or because they're supposed to play this neutral role, this conduit, and so they're being overlooked. And so just to wrap those things up, prior to the pandemic, interpreting could be lucrative, depending on how one marketed himself or herself. The connects he or she had, the routes that an individual took in order to secure different type of work. It could be very lucrative. That was impacted by the pandemic, and unless you felt comfortable moving to these remote platforms, then your income has suffered severely. But these remote platforms are definitely here to stay, and they're in the forefront of carrying out care for people. I write, the pandemic has forced organizations and interpreters to cease in-person assignments, turning to remote platforms. This has not been the smoothest transition for those who were not familiar with remote platforms for both the interpreter and the client alike. For the majority of, excuse me, for the majority of interpreters, remote platforms are being paid less by agencies and organizations, are more expedient and consequently earn less, do not provide incentives such as paid breaks, demand much from interpreters, including quiet spacing, stable internet connection equipment, and knowledge of platform use. A few interpreters have escaped being negatively impacted by the pandemic. This speaks of the staff interpreter whose job was spared and whose necessary organization revamped itself to continue offering its services. Similarly, this protection, almost consisting of a necessary trifecta, accounts for the freelance interpreter who had a client base already or quickly learned to provide interpretation services remotely, and whose clientele also knew or learned how to receive services remotely. It appears that those who were younger were able to recover more quickly because of their technological savviness, and that those who were older and had better job security also fared better during the pandemic. Remote interpretation has catapulted toward the center stage of the interpretive world. It was an alternative that interpreters and consumers knew existed, but whose use was never taken as seriously. Now it is necessary to use remote interpretation. Many interpreters, however, are concerned that remote interpretation will be the new standard. Those with apprehensions fear that their counterparts will undersell their services to get clients, that businesses will take whatever measures they can to pay less, and that there will be too much competition and not enough labor to go around. This is compounded by the weight of the work itself for some. For interpreters, for some of them, it is very difficult to render their services about this subject and not be emotionally bothered. So what I found is just that remote interpretation is on the map, and that only those who embrace it and who at the same time advocate for themselves, for their rates, for their worth, and even for their mental respect and rally for what they are worthy of, professionally worthy of, will get what they deserve and what they have to offer. So that is all that I found, and I just hope that you found something interesting, or something, or were challenged in some way. And if you have any questions or comments, once again, my name is Shannon Branch. I am on LinkedIn. Catalina, you can provide my LinkedIn account for people to reach out to me, and you can email me at sbranch322@gmail.com. But I thank you all for listening, and I hope that this was something interesting for you all. Carry on that conversation. Take care.